All right, students, today is we're going to look at the idea, really start the battle for graphing. And we're going to see today, a lot of today is just vocabulary. We've got to know the language before we can, so when I talk about it, you'll understand it. So if you notice today, I actually gave you a note sheet, but what we're going to look at is actually on pages 353 and 355. So there's a lot of terms, and most of those terms you know. And so that's why I gave you the note sheet. Just want to point out a few things. Guys, if we were looking at graphing and we had our grid, our coordinate plane here, all right, and we had our coordinate plane to graph on, which one of those is the x-axis? Yeah, that's right. My horizontal is my x-axis, so that means my vertical is the y-axis. And so if I want you to graph an ordered pair, it's just the point on the graph. So we've already said that when I answer equations in two variables, I have pairs of numbers as my answer. So if I gave you the ordered pair 3, -1, all right, if I went to graph that, well, this first coordinate, we call it the x-coordinate. New term today. It's also called the abscissa. All right, and then the second coordinate, we call it the y-coordinate, and it is called the ordinate. So those are going to be some new terms. So if I wanted to graph that ordered pair, we look at the abscissa first, and it's +3. So remember, we start at the origin. The origin is where our axis intersect. Remember, the coordinates for the origin are 0, 0, and we're going to go right 3, and then we go down 1, and that's how we plot a point. All right, we just put a big fat juicy dot there. Now, the other thing we need to remember from Math Past is this idea of quadrants. And if you remember, our coordinate plane is divided into 4 quadrants. When I look at quadrant number 1, my x's are positive and my y's are positive. If we go to quadrant 2, my x's are negative and my y's are positive. If I'm in quadrant 3, okay, my x's are negative and my y's are negative. And if I'm in quadrant 4, then my x's are positive and my y's are negative. So just a few little reminders there. Remember, if I plot a point and that point is on an axis, if it's on an axis, it's not in a quadrant. Okay, so tonight you're going to do a worksheet that's got a lot of these terms on it that'll help us remember what we learned in Math Past. Now, the next thing I want you to look at is the next idea, and I want you to star this on your vocab sheet, is the idea of a linear equation. Okay, so go ahead and star that on your note sheet, and we're going to see a linear equation is an equation whose graph is the line. Do you see the word line in linear? Now, we're going to see that there's 2 different versions or 2 different forms of a linear equation. And the form of the linear equation that we're going to work with today is standard form. And this is what standard form looks like. I've got ax plus by equals c. Now, a is the number that's in front of x, b is the number that's in front of y, and then c is my constant term over here by himself. Now, if you notice, it says a, b, and c are real numbers. A and b cannot both be 0. All right, and it says, and if a, b, and c are integers, then the equation is said to be in standard form. So let's look at some examples here. If you look at example number 1, we've got 2x plus 7y equals 0. What number there represents a? Yeah, this is a because it's in front of x. What number represents b? That's 7. Okay, and c is 0. It's my constant term. All right, so if we look at my next example, we've got 5x minus 6y equals 9. 5 is A, -6 is B, and 9 is C. You say, but Mrs. Burton, it says minus and the equation up there says plus. I know that, but how do we subtract in algebra? Right, we add the opposite. Now, really closely, I want you to pay attention to this last one. Let's look here, okay? Y equals 4. Is that in standard form? Well, we're going to find out it is. Who's missing? That's right, x is missing. So if x is missing, that means that a must have been 0. Okay? So one big clue, one big way that helps me figure out if I'm in standard form or not, realize x and y are on the same side of the equal sign, and then we've got a constant over here alone. Now you've got to be able to recognize which linear equation you have. So it's going to be real important to memorize the pattern and be able to pick it out. Now let's look at some of these that are not in standard form. If you notice at the first one, definitely not in standard form because it's y is alone. Now, does anybody remember what that is from Math Past? Yes, slope-intercept form. Okay, if I look at equation number 2, you say, but Mrs. Burton, x and y are together on one side. Well, we're going to see that a and b cannot be fractions, okay? I can't have a fraction as a or b, so if it's a fraction, then it's not a linear equation. But I have a question for you. Do you remember how to get rid of fractions? Yeah, we do. Good job. Okay, now, the ones that are non-linear, okay? We're going to see x squared plus y equals 8. Hey, chapter 5 land. Remember, that's a quadratic equation. And quadratic graphs look different than linear graphs. And if you look at my bottom one down here, remember, there's not even a plus sign or a minus sign. We're multiplying them together, and that is non-linear. So that's the first thing. You've got to be able to recognize if my equation is linear and that it's in standard form. And again, pretty easy as we go through. Now, here's what they want us to do. We're going to start the graphing battle. They want me to graph this equation. So as we go through these, as we go through chapter 8, my first question is always going to be to you, what form of the line is that? And hopefully you would say, oh, Miss Burton, that's standard form. I know it's standard because x and y are on one side and I've got my constant on the other. Now, here's how we graph a line in standard form. We graph a line in standard form by intercepts. Okay, what does that mean? Well, we worked with intercepts a little bit last year in pre-algebra. Remember, an intercept is where it crosses the axis. So my x-intercept is where my line crosses the x-axis. So x-intercept, it's where my line crosses the x-axis. And then my y-intercept, and that's the one we worked with most time last year, is where the line crosses the y-axis. So we use this idea of finding the intercepts when I graph in standard form. Now here's how we do that. If I want to find the x-axis, or the x-intercept, I make y 0. Now let's look up here. If I make y 0, whoop, he's gone. So all we have is x equals 6. So that means that my x-intercept is 6, 0. That's the ordered pair that corresponds with the point where my line crosses the x-axis. Now, if I want to find the y-intercept, well, to find the y-intercept, we're going to make x 0. So if I make x 0, whoopie's gone. And so that means y equals 6. And so that's how we find the intercepts. Now, I have to tell you, I would rather graph lines in standard form all day long. I think it's so much easier than the second route we're going to learn a little bit later in the week. All right, so now how do I graph that? Well, this is my x-axis, my x-intercept on the x-axis. So remember, we start at the origin, 0, 0, and my x is 6. It's positive. 6. Okay, and then for my y-intercept on the y-axis, my ordered pair is 0, 6. Well, that means we're not going up or down. We're staying at the origin, left or right, and we're going up 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And now, to draw our line, we just connect the dots, like the kids' meal at Denny's. And there's my line. Okay, let's try another one together. All right, we're going to graph the equation in standard form. So let's look at our next slide. Go ahead and write down this equation. Again, as soon as you realize, oh, what form of the line is that? Oh, that's in standard form. And as soon as you see it in standard form, that means that we're going to graph by intercepts. So if I'm going to graph intercepts, to find the x-intercept, we make y 0. So if I make y 0, Youppi's gone, so we have 2x equals 10. So what does x equal? Yeah, x equals 5. That is my x-intercept. We're at 5, 0. We can go ahead and plot it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's my x-intercept on my x-axis. And now we need to find the y-intercept. Remember, if I'm solving for y, then I'm going to make x 0. So he's gone. And so we have 5y equals 10. I didn't put my 0 there. So y has to equal what? Y equals 2. So that is my y-intercept. My y-intercept goes on the y-axis. So we're going to go up 2. There it is. Big, fat, juicy dot. And then we connect the dots. And that is my line. All right, now, 2 more scenarios to look at as we're talking about this idea of graphing lines. Let's go ahead and look at these 2 equations. Ooh, we talked about this just a minute ago. Remember, if my equation says y equals 2, well, if it's in standard form, who's missing? Yeah, do you realize x isn't there? Well, if x isn't here in this equation, if x isn't here, then what does that mean a had to be? Yeah, a had to be 0. All right? So all I have is a y-intercept, and we know it's at 0, 2. So let's look at my graph over here. Where does y equal 2? Well, remember, y is the vertical going up and down. So here's where y equals 2, and we're going to find out that everywhere on that grid line is where y equals 2. And so we're going to see when all we have is y equals, we're going to see that y equals means I have a horizontal line. And I think you need to memorize that. Now we'll talk a little bit more a little bit later in the week why it is and when we start talking about slope. But if all I have is y equals something, y equals some number, then I have a horizontal line. Now, let's go over here, okay, and let's look at x equals -6, my second one. Well, if I look here, if x equals -6, who's missing from my standard form of the line? Yeah, y's missing. So if y's missing, what does that mean b was? B was 0. And so here, all I give you is an x-intercept where it crosses the x-axis. So how do we graph that? Well, it's -6, so we start at the origin, and because it's -6, we go left 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that means everywhere on that grid line, okay, everywhere on that grid line is x equals -6. And so we're going to see whenever we have x only, x equals, we get a vertical line. All right, now you really need to memorize that y only is a horizontal line, x only is a vertical line. So now tonight for homework you have a worksheet. Okay, the front is all terms that we kind of looked at and you're going to read through tonight in your book. And then you've got 4 graphs on the back. Okay, and we're going to be graphing in line in standard form. So we're going to graph those lines by using intercepts. Great job today. You can go ahead and start your homework.